Chapter 7, India's Cultural Roots. That which cannot be stolen, that which cannot be confiscated by rulers, that which is not a burden as it does not weigh anything, that which though it is used only grew every day, that is the greatest wealth of all, the wealth of true knowledge, by Subhashita, wise saying. A rishi from Hampi, Karnataka, the Buddha from Bhutan, Mahavira from Bihar. Here we can see the pictures. The big questions. First, what are the Vedas? What is their message? Second, what new schools of thought emerged in India in the first millennium before Common Era? What are their core principles? Third, what is the contribution of folk and tribal traditions to Indian culture? Indian culture, by an estimate, is several millenniums old. Likely any ancient tree, it has many roots and many branches. The roots nurture a common trunk, and from the trunk emerge many branches, which are different manifestations of Indian culture, yet united by a common trunk. Some of these branches are about art, literature, science, medicine, religion, the art of governance, martial art, and so on. There are also schools of thought, by which we mean group of thinkers or spiritual seekers who share similar ideas about human life, the world, etc. Many archaeologists and scholars have pointed out that some of Indian cultural roots go all the way to the Indus or Harappan or Sindhu Saraswati civilization, which we visit in chapter 6. Later on, over time, hundreds of schools of thought emerged in India. We will see here a few early schools which have shaped in India into a country which is unique personality. By understanding them and their roots, we can understand India, that is Bharat, better. Here are some definitions. Spiritual, concerned with the spirit or soul, Atma in Sanskrit and many Indian languages. Spirituality is the search for a deeper or higher dimension beyond our current personality. Seeker, someone who seeks the truth of this world. This could be a sage, a saint, a yogi, a philosopher, etc. The Vedas and Vedic culture. A. What are the Vedas? The word Veda comes from the Sanskrit Vid, which means knowledge, hence Vidya for instance. We briefly mentioned the Rig Veda in earlier chapters. In fact, there are 4 Vedas, the Rig Veda, the Yajur Veda, the Sam Veda and the Atharva Veda. They are the most ancient texts of India and indeed among the most ancient in the world. The Vedas consist of thousands of hymns, prayer in the form of poems and songs that were recited orally, not written. Those hymns were composed in Saptasindhava region, which we visit in chapter 5. It is difficult to say what exactly the Rig Veda, the most ancient of the 4, was composed. Experts have proposed dates ranging from the 5th to the 2nd millennium before Common Era. So for anything between 100 and 200 generations, these texts have been committed to memory through rigorous training and passed on orally with hardly any alteration. Don't miss out. These meticulous transmission over thousands of years explains why in 2008 UNESCO recognized the Vedic chanting as a masterpiece of the oral and intangible heritage of humanity. UNESCO. UNESCO stands for United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. It promotes dialogue between people and nations through education, science and culture. The Vedic hymns were composed by rishi, male seers or sages, and rishikas, female ones, in an early form of the Sanskrit language. They were addressed in poetical form to many deities, gods or goddesses such as Indra, Agni, Varuna, Mitra, Saraswati, Ushas, and many more. Together with the Shris, these deities sustained rhythm or truth and order in human life and in the cosmos. The early rishis and rishikas saw those gods and goddesses as one, not separate being. As one famous hymn puts it, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahudha Vadanti. The existent, that is, the supreme reality is one, but sages give it many names. Cosmos, the world or universe as an order and harmonious system. In the world view, some values were especially important, beginning with truth, which was often another name for God. The last mantras, verses of the Rig Veda, also called for unity among people. Worldview, a certain view or understanding of the world, its origin or its workings. Come together, speak truth. Speak together. Common be your mind. May your thoughts agree. Be your purpose. United your heart. May your thoughts be united so all may agree. B. Vedic society. Early Vedic society was organized in different janas or clans, that is, larger group of people. The Rig Veda alone lists over 30 such janas. For instance, the Bhartas, the Purus, the Kurus, the Yadus, the Turvashas, etc. Each clan was associated with a particular region of the northwest part of the subcontinent. Here we can see a timeline. 1500 before Common Era, 1000 before Common Era, 500 before Common Era. Here Upanishads were composed. Before a little 500 Common Era, birth of Buddha and Mahavira. 1 Common Era, 500 Common Era. Between 1000 before Common Era and 1 Common Era, there are Vedic schools of thoughts established. Not much is known of how these janas governed their society. The Vedas only give us few clues through words like Raja, a king or ruler, Sabha and Samiti, both of which refer to a collective gathering or assembly. Many professions are mentioned in the Vedic texts, such as agriculturist, weaver, potter, builder, carpenter, healer, dancer, barber, priest, etc. Healer, someone who used traditional practices to relieve or heal diseases. Let's explore. Do you know the term for a society where people select their leaders? How do you think people can benefit from such a situation? What could happen if they live under leaders that they did not choose? Hint, think back to what you are learning in the theme Governance and Democracy. Write your thoughts in a paragraph of about 100-150 words. C. Vedic schools of thought. Vedic culture also developed many rituals. Yajna, often read as yagya, directed toward various deities, gods or goddesses for individual or collective benefit and well-being. Daily rituals were generally in the form of prayers and offerings to Agni, the deity associated with fire, but those rituals become more and more complex in the course of time. a group of texts known as Upanishads built upon Vedic concepts and introduced new ones such as rebirth, taking birth again and again, and karma, our actions or their results. According to one school of thought, generally known as Vedanta, everything, human life, nature, and the universe is one divine essence called Brahman, not to be confused with the god Brahma or sometimes just Tat. That two well-known mantras express this in a simple but profound ways. Aham Brahmas, Aham Brahmas, Brahmasmi. Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahma. That is to say, I am divine. Tat Tvam Asi. You are that. The Upanishads also introduce the concept of Atman or self, the divine essence that resides in every being but is ultimately one with Brahman. It follows that everything in the world is connected and interdependent. These explains a common prayer that begins with the Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina or may all creature be happy and goes on to wish them all to be free from disease and sorrow. Think about it. Have you heard or read any other story that conveyed an important message? What values did it teach you? Early in the first millennium before Common Era, several more schools of thought grew out of the Vedas. One of them was yoga, which developed method intended to achieve the realization of Brahma in one's consciousness. Together, these schools of thought became the foundation for what we call Hinduism today. Consciousness, the quality or state of being aware, for instance, of something within oneself. Buddhism, other school of thought also emerged, which did not accept the authority of the Vedas and developed their own system. One of them is Buddhism. About 2.5 millennia ago, a young prince named Siddhartha Gautam was born in Lumbini, today in Nepal. Many stories from the Upanishads tells us the importance of asking questions, whether these questions come from men, women or children. Shvet and the seed of reality. Chandogya Upanishad. Rishi Uddalaka Aruni sent his son Shiv Shvetketu to a Gurukul to learn the Vedas. When Shvetketu returned 12 years later, his father realized he had become very proud of his learning, so Uddalaka tested him with questions on the nature of Brahman, which Shvetketu could not answer. Uddalaka proceeds to explain how Brahman, though invisible, is everywhere, such as the seed of a banyan fruit seems empty when you open it, but already contains the fruit banyan tree, or just as all kind of different pots can be made out of the same clay. Similarly, everything around us has emerged from the same essence, Brahman. He concluded his teaching with these words: everything consists of these subtle essence. You are that Shvetketu. Nachiket and his quest. Katha Upanishad. Once a man was given away all his possession in a ritual. As his son Nachiket kept asking him which god he would be offered to, the father became angry and answered, I give you to Yam, that is, to the god of death. Nachiket then proceeded to Yama's world and after a long wait met the mighty god. One question was on his mind. What happens after the death of the body? Yam tried to avoid answering, but the boy persisted. Pleased, Yama explained that the Atma or self is hidden within all creature. It is neither born nor does it die. It is immortal. Having acquired this profound knowledge, Nachiket returned to his father, who welcomed him joyfully. The debate of Gargi and Yajnavalkya. Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Once the wise king Janaka announced a prize for the winner of a philosophical debate. Yajnavalkya, a renowned rishi, came to the king's court and defeated many scholars until Gargi, a rishika, asked him a series of questions on the nature of the world and finally on the nature of Brahman. At that point, Yajnavalkya asked her to stop asking further questions. Later, however, Gargi resumed her questions and Yajnavalkya went on to explain how Brahman is what makes the world, the seasons, the rivers, and everything else possible. Nepal. Depending on the source they use, scholars have came up with widely different conclusions as regarded the precise year of his birth. In chapter 4, we choose 560 before Common Era as an approximate age. In any case, it makes no difference to our story here. As the story goes, then Siddhartha Gautama grew up living a protected life in the palace. One day, at the age of 29, he asked to be driven through the city in a chariot, and for the first time in his life came across an old man, a sick man, and a dead body. He also saw an ascetic who appeared to be happy and at peace. Following this experience, Siddhartha decided to give up his palace life, leaving behind his wife and son, traveling on foot on an ascetic meeting other ascetic and scholars. He searched for the root cause of suffering in human life. After meditating for many days under a peepal tree at Bodh Gaya, today in Bihar, he attained enlightenment. He realized that avidya, ignorance, and attachment are the source of human suffering and conceived a method to remove these two causes. There are some definitions. First one is ascetic. Someone who engages in a rigorous discipline to attain a higher consciousness. Attachment, the condition of having a bond with someone or something, usually through sentiment or habit. Siddhartha then became known as the Buddha, which means the enlightened or awakened one. The Buddha started teaching what he had realized, including the idea of ahimsa, which is generally translated as non-violence but originally means non-hurting or non-injuring. He also insisted on a sincere inner discipline. The following saying of his expresses this simply. The Buddha teachings Ajanta caves depict the picture. Not by water is one made pure, though many people may bathe here in sacred rivers, but one is pure, in whom truth and dharma reside. Conquering oneself is greater than conquering 1,000 men on the battlefield 1,000 times. The Buddha founded the Sangha, a community of bhikshus or monks, and later bhikshunis or nuns who dedicated themselves to practicing and spreading his teachings. His influence on India and indeed the whole of Asia was enormous. As we will discover later, it is still perceptible today. Monk, a man who gave up the usual life in the world, dedicate himself to religious or spiritual pursuits. A monk usually takes vows, that is, commits himself to follow strict rules for a disciplined life. Nun, the female equivalent of a monk. These stone panels, some 1800-year-old, shows the Buddha teaching. Let's explore. Discuss the way the Buddha is depicted in the above panel. Can you name some states of India or some other countries where Buddhism is a major religion even today? Try to plot these on a world map. Jainism. Jainism is another important school of thought that became widespread at the same time. Although its roots are said to be much more ancient, just like Siddhartha Gautama, Prince Vardhamana was born into a royal family in the early 6th century before Common Era. His birthplace was near the city of Vaishali in modern-day Bihar. At the age of 30, he decided to leave his home and go in search of spiritual knowledge. He practiced an ascetic discipline and after 12 years achieved infinite knowledge or supreme wisdom. He became known as Mahavira or Great Hero and started preaching what he had realized. A traditional painting of Mahavira here we can see. Don't miss out. The word Jain or Jaina comes from Jina, meaning conqueror. This does not refer to the conquest of territory or enemies, but to the conquest of ignorance and attachments. So, as to reach enlightenment, Jain teachings include Ahimsa, Anekantvad, and Apargriha. These ideas shared to a large extent with Buddhism and Vedantic school of thought are central to Indian culture. The first may be illustrated by the saying of Mahavira: all breathing, existing, living, sentient creatures should not be slain, nor treated with violence, nor abused, nor tormented, nor driven away. Let us define the last two in simple terms. Anekantvada means not just one aspect or perspective, that is, the truth has many aspects and cannot be fully described by any single statement. Apagriya means non-possession and advises detachment from material possession, limiting oneself to what is truly necessary in life. Jainism also insists on the interconnectedness and interdependence of all creatures, from humans to invisible organisms, as they support each other and cannot live without one another. Scientists studying nature, flora and fauna have again and again confirmed this deep truth. The Jataka tales, which have delighted generations of Indian children and adults, tell stories of Buddha's former births and express in simple terms the Buddhist values. In a well-known tale, the Buddha was the king of a large troop of monkeys. They lived near a huge tree which bore fruits of divine fragrance and taste. Despite the monkey king's instruction that no fruit should escape, one day a ripe fruit fell into the stream below. Carried by the current, it was caught in a net and taken to the palace. The king was so enchanted by its taste that he ordered his soldiers to locate the tree it came from. After a long search, they found the tree and the monkeys enjoying the tree's fruit. The soldiers attacked the monkeys. The only way for the monkey king to save his monkeys was to help them cross the stream. But they could not do so on their own. Being much larger than them, the monkey king caught hold of a tree on the bank and let them use his body as a bridge to cross the stream. Although he was severely bruised in the process and eventually died, the king, who watched the scene from a distance, was greatly moved by the monkey king's selfless sacrifice. He thought about the role of a king with respect to his subject. A stone panel at Barhut in Madhya Pradesh depicting the story of Monkey King. A Jain story. Rohiniya was an extraordinarily skilled burglar who evaded all attempts to catch him. On his way to a city, he accidentally heard a few sentences from a sermon that Mahavira was giving about achieving liberation from the ordinary life of ignorance. Reaching the city, Rohiniya was recognized and arrested. He pretended to be a simple farmer. A minister devised a clever plan to force him to confess his identity, but Rohiniya, remembering Mahavira's word, was able to detect the minister's plan and defeated it. Feeling remorseful, Rohiniya approached Mahavira, confessed his crimes, returned the stolen treasure, and asked for forgiveness. He became a monk, realized the illusion he was living in, and focused on acquiring higher knowledge. The story illustrates the importance of right actions and right thinking, and also illustrates the fact that everyone should have a second chance. Let's explore. Observe the above panel from a Jain temple in New Delhi. What is striking about it? What message does it carry? Think about it. In both Buddhism and Jainism, ahimsa means much more than refraining from physical violence against a person or an animal. It also means refraining from violence in thought, such as having ill feelings towards anyone. If we observe ourselves carefully, we may notice such negative thoughts and learn to turn them into positive ones. Sometimes such negative thoughts are even directed at ourselves. In both Buddhism and Jainism, monks and sometimes nuns too began traveling across the land to spread their respective teachings far and wide. Some of them created new monasteries in faraway places, while others lead ascetic lives in caves cut in the rock. Archaeological findings have revealed many traces of those monasteries. Sometimes even the names of the monks who lived in the rock-cut caves and slept on the stone beds. Caves cut into the rock at Ellora, Maharashtra between the 6th and 10th century Common Era. Some of the caves are Hindu, others are Buddhist and Jain. Think about it. In English, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism are often labeled religion. You may notice that we have avoided this term, preferring schools of thought and later in this chapter, belief system. This is because there are many aspects to those schools and systems which we will explore gradually. A philosophical aspect, a spiritual aspect, a religious aspect, and a ethical aspect, a social aspect, to name a few. Many scholars agreed that the word religion is too limiting in context of the Indian civilization. There were yet other schools of thought at the time. For example, one of them known as the Charvak school, sometimes also Lokayat, believed that this material world is the only thing that existed and therefore there can be no life after death. This school does not seem to have gained much popularity and it disappeared with time. We mentioned it to show that there was a wide variety of intellectual and spiritual belief systems. People were free to choose what suited them. Although the Vedic, Buddhist, and Jain schools had important differences, they also shared some common concepts such as dharma, karma, rebirth, the search for an end to suffering and ignorance, and many important values. These is the trunk of the tree we started this chapter with. Folk and tribal roots. The cultural roots we have seen so far are well documented in many texts. India has also had rich oral traditions, that is, teaching or practices transmitted through everyday practice. Without written text, this is the case of the Vedas. Among them are numerous folk tradition that is transmitted by common people and tribal tradition transmitted by tribes. What is a tribe? There are many definitions for this social entity. Today, anthropologists usually consider a tribe to be a group of families or clans sharing a tradition of common descent, a culture and a language, living as a close-knit community under a chief and holding no private property. Interestingly, ancient India did not have a word for tribe. Tribes were just different janas that lived in a specific environment, such as forest or mountains. The construction of India uses the term tribes and tribal communities in English and Janjati in Hindi. According to official figure in 2011, India had 705 tribes spread over most states, amounting to a population of about 104 million people, more than the population of Australia and the United Kingdom together. In the 19th century, anthropologists studying tribes often described them as primitive or inferior to civilized people. With the deeper studies of tribal communities and their rich and complex cultures, such biased judgments have been mostly abandoned. There has been a constant interaction between folk and tribal traditions, and the leading schools of thought, such as those we mentioned in this chapter, deities, concepts, legends, and rituals have been freely extended in both directions. For instance, according to tradition, Jagannath worship at Puri, Odisha was originally a tribal deity. This is also the case with various forms of the mother goddess worshipped across India. Some tribes, on the other hand, adopted Hindu deities long ago and possesses their own version of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. This has been well documented from India's northeastern state all the way to Tamil Nadu. How have such interactions taken place for so long and so naturally? It is in the end because folk, tribal, and Hindu belief system have many similar concepts. For instance, in all three elements of nature, such as mountains, rivers, trees, plants, and animals, and some stones too, are regarded as sacred because there is consciousness behind all of them. Indeed, tribes generally worship many deities associated with those natural elements. For the Toda tribals of the Nilgiris of Tamil Nadu, for instance, one of them is pictured in the image on the right. Over 30 peaks of this mountain range are residents of a god or goddesses. Those peaks are so sacred that the Todas avoid pointing to them with a finger. But despite this municipality of deities, as with Hinduism, many tribal people have a concept of higher divinity or supreme being. For example, several tribes of Arunachal Pradesh worship Donya Pola, a combined form of the sun and the moon, who later rose to the higher statue of Supreme God. This is also the case of god Khandoba in parts of central India. In eastern India, the Munda and Santhala tribes, among others, worship Singbonga, a supreme deity who created this whole world. There are many more such examples. The Indian sociologist Henry Bittelli summed up this situation in these words: the thousands of castes and tribes on the Indian subcontinent have influenced each other at their religious beliefs and practices since the beginning of history and before. That is, the tribal religions have been influenced by Hinduism is widely accepted, but it is equally true that Hinduism, not only in its formative phase but throughout its evolution, has been influenced by tribal religions. Clearly, the result of this long interaction has been mutual enrichment. In this manner, folk and tribal beliefs and practices also count among India's cultural roots. We will further develop these points in the next chapter. Before we move on, the Vedas, India's earliest text, gave rise to several schools of thought. Vedanta and Yoga are among the best known. Buddhism and Jainism departed from the authority of the Vedas and laid emphasis on some specific values and practices. Although these schools had different principles and methods, they also shared some important concepts. They were all looking for the cause of suffering and the means of removing ignorance. Tribal belief system and art have interacted for millennia with Hinduism. There were free borrowing and giving from every side. Tribal belief systems generally regard the land and its feature as sacred. They often have
At the same time, a higher concept of divinity. With these, we have completed our chapter. Thank you.